You guys are ready? All right, go for it. Good evening. Welcome to the Environmental Planning Commission meeting of November 1st, 2023. I call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. For those joining in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio-video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it is your turn to speak and the number item or the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them into the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Now I will ask the EPC clerk to take roll.
Commissioner Gutierrez. Commissioner Haymeyer.
Here.
Commissioner Cranston. Commissioner Nunez.
Present.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Vice Chair Dempsey.
Here.
Chair Yin.
Here. Thank you.
All commissioners are present except for Commissioner Cranston.
Thank you. We do not have minutes for this week, so we will move on to oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Do we have anyone lined up for general oral communications? Okay. In that case, no general oral communications. We will move on to study session. Agenda 5.1, TDM Ordinance, Vision, and Goals. We'll first have a staff presentation, then questions by the EPC followed by public comment. At the closure of public comment, the commission will then deliberate and provide direction. Staff presentation will be from Transportation Planner Ben Pacho and Principal Planner Diana Pancioli. Please begin.
Good evening, EPC members. My name is Ben Pacho. I'm a transportation planner in the Public Works Department. I'd like to recognize my co-presenter, Diana Pancioli, the city's principal planner, and joining us remotely are Julia Ween and Gary Shui, who are with the consulting firm Steer Davies Gleave. So what is transportation demand management? The 2030 General Plan defines TDM as the use of strategies to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and mitigate parking demand. As part of the city's planning and building permit process, the city requires developers to implement TDM measures for new projects so that future residents and employees will be incentivized to use alternative, sustainable transportation options. The image on the right shows a number of TDM tools and options the city may require of new development, particularly as conditions for project approval. This may involve providing on-site bike parking facilities, public transit subsidies, alternative hybrid work schedules, parking cash out, as well as on-site car share. By implementing these TDM measures, new development will help the city achieve important citywide goals, such as reducing traffic congestion, improving air quality and livability, as well as expanding mobility access across the city. For additional policy background, the basis for TDM in Mountain View was first established in the 2030 General Plan. which subsequently informed the specific TDM provisions that are now currently required in the city's precise plans. Additionally, City Council has identified developing a citywide TDM ordinance as a strategic priority in fiscal years 2023 to 2025. So the goal really of the citywide TDM ordinance is to build on the success of TDM practice in precise plan areas by applying its use citywide, where a more consistent, standardized approach would be more suitable to achieving the best results. Additionally, the ordinance will help create more transparency around how TDM requirements are applied to future projects citywide. While the ordinance will only apply to new development, the transportation team will offer and encourage existing sites to comply with the provisions of the new citywide TDM ordinance. And now delving into the project overview, key upcoming tasks include the ordinance framework, where we'll develop a TDM toolkit and key performance standards. We'll also prepare draft ordinance language that will shape development conditions of approval. And to successfully implement the ordinance, staff will consider management tools and solutions for monitoring and enforcement of TDM requirements and standards. Reviewing the project's work plan, we're currently situated squarely in the second Shero, as seen in the vision and goal setting phase. Importantly, stakeholder engagement will continue throughout the length of the project, and staff will return to BPAC, EPC, and City Council for a study session next year to review the draft recommended framework policies and performance standards. Okay, I think we're back on, yeah. Okay. Okay. In our previous task of analyzing existing conditions, the project team sought to understand the depth and breadth of current TDM requirements, as well as processes for implementing and evaluating existing TDM plans and programs. For example, a few of the key findings include variable trip reduction targets at the site level. As noted earlier, the 2012 Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program requires sites to reduce trips by a set target for reducing travel demand and associated emissions. It's important to note such trip reduction targets have since evolved to account for recently approved projects and more innovative approaches to managing travel demand. Similarly, TDM programs and performance standards may vary from project to project, with some sites required to comply with peak hour trip caps, while some need only comply with trip reduction targets or percentages. Also, penalties for noncompliance with TDM requirements vary across land uses, such that financial penalties apply to commercial but not residential projects. And finally, the analysis identified a lack of standardization across TDM monitoring reports, which are required by the city, including the structure of reports and reporting elements. And to corroborate our existing conditions analysis, the project team sought to collect on-the-ground data from those closest in TDM practice. To that end, staff held 14 stakeholder interviews with a range of developers, including affordable, market-rate residential and commercial developers, as well as major employers, local property managers, and staff from the city and Mountain View Transportation Management Association, or TMA. Importantly, these stakeholder interviews provided key insights on existing challenges and opportunities with meeting the city's TDM requirements. And as such, key stakeholders provided extensive feedback on their experience with implementing TDM policies and programs. The main findings here organized in a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges matrix, or SWOX analysis. To share a few highlights, participants noted some strengths, which are at the top left there, reflected in a shared consensus on the need for corporate investment in TDM. Not just to meet project conditions of approval, but also to support employee retention and recruitment efforts. Areas of weaknesses that were identified involved a general lack of standardization of TDM performance requirements, including variable parking minimums and inconsistent application of required TDM measures and trip reduction targets. And then moving to the bottom right, common themes around challenges touched on the capacity constraints for implementing TDM requirements, such that smaller to mid-sized businesses may not have the dedicated staff resources to manage and monitor TDM program activities. And lastly, participants identified an opportunity to potentially pool resources across project sites that share common TDM plans and measures. This could be assessed along the role of the TMA, which could further provide support in building the capacity of sites to implement TDM and satisfy monitoring requirements. And then following our existing conditions analysis and stakeholder interviews, staff had set about drafting a vision statement for the project. And this work involved reviewing TDM-related themes called out in key policies adopted at the local, regional, and state levels. So note here, the blue bolded keywords indicate recurring themes across plans and policies, such as sustainability, equity, connectivity, parking management, and economic vitality. And staff held a visioning workshop this fall where participants were asked to craft a 1 to 2 sentence vision statement that would help define the overall intent of the policy, but more specifically, what the TDM ordinance should respond to. The vision statement is based on existing conditions analysis and stakeholder input, whereby the Transportation Demand Management Ordinance will seek to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips for new development and increase use of multimodal transportation alternatives that are sustainable, equitable, effective, and respond to changing demands. Participants at the visioning workshop also articulated key goals, which would support the project in realizing its vision and overall policy objectives. The project goals span both operationally focused goals as well as citywide mission-driven goals. In particular, the TDM project framework should prioritize setting predictable and transparent requirements, of which are flexible and scalable, and that should also seek to center equity and multimodal travel options to reduce VMT and parking demand. Recently, staff presented the vision and project goals of the TDM ordinance to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee on Wednesday, October 25th. BPAC members were generally supportive of the draft vision and goals and noted the importance of ensuring that there is a transfer of TDM conditions between property owners as triggered by a change of tenure. Additionally, from an equity perspective, BPAC members suggested staff consider opportunities to integrate existing projects, not just for new development, into the TDM ordinance framework. This would be to ensure the burden of compliance and the benefits made available through the ordinance are equally shared across the community. There was also consensus among BPAC to prioritize developing measurable goals and enforcement mechanisms, so that the outcomes of the ordinance better align and support its policy intentions. For next steps in the project, staff will present the input gathered from BPAC and EPC at the Council Transportation Committee in winter of 2024. Staff will then set about developing the draft TDM framework in spring 2024, where specific TDM performance standards will be defined, along with a user-friendly toolkit and technology solutions to support monitoring and enforcement of the ordinance. Staff will also ensure to benchmark our progress against neighboring jurisdictions. Staff will then hold a second study session with EPC, BPAC, and City Council to receive input on key elements of the draft framework and policies in fall 2024. And finally, adoption hearings of the TDM ordinance are tentatively scheduled in early 2025. And so, moving on to the substance of today's study session, staff looks forward to receiving your comments and input on the draft vision statement and project goals to help ensure the TDM ordinance best aligns with EPC's vision and hopes for the project.
Thank you. Right now, I'm going to ask if EPC members, commissioners, have any questions. Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Nunez.
So are we offering any kind of like general thoughts or thinkings? I noticed there was 2 closed-ended questions, which are pretty much just yes or no. And so I'm wondering, is the intent for us to just give a yes or no, or what's the latitude for like that staff is expecting in terms of response?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. Diana Pancholi, Principal Planner with the Planning Division. At this point of time, we have included 2 specific questions because we want to make sure that the vision statement that we have drafted and the project goals are in alignment with the city's vision for the TDM ordinance. But we will also, we'll be happy to receive any other comments that you might have to tell staff what to consider, related to this topic. As we prepare the framework. But we definitely want to hear your thoughts on the vision statement and the project goals.
Commissioner Haymeyer.
So just to clarify on the timeline, so if this is adopted in, let's say, early 2025, the projects that are approved between now and that adoption time, the process will remain the same, kind of ad hoc project by project, is that right?
That's correct. So the existing infrastructure will be used for project approval, and then the ordinance, once adopted, will then kind of will be in place to replace the existing.
Got it. So there's approximately like 20 months or so at least, right? Because once it gets adopted in 2025, there'll be some lag time. So we could imagine, I'm just thinking back to that map of the different fragmentation, we could imagine that growing. But I don't know if that's fair to assume or not.
Your assessment is correct. It's going to take some time before we finish the project. But an example of what staff is doing right now is with new projects that are coming in, we do have, we have tried to add some language into the conditions of approval, which allows us some flexibility on, specific things related to TDM that if and when the project comes online and we have a TDM ordinance in place, that they comply with that.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you accepting comments or only questions at this point?
Right now, questions, please.
Okay.
No? Okay. If there are no more questions, we're going to move on to public comments. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can unmute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, are there any yellow cards today for this item?
No speakers.
No public speakers here in attendance. How about on Zoom?
None on Zoom either.
Okay, thank you. Now, at this point, we're going to move on to EPC deliberation and action. Would anyone like to discuss? Commissioner Cranston?
So with respect to the 2 questions, the vision statement I think seems pretty good. When it comes to the goals, I'm accustomed to goals that are a little more quantifiable. Statement predictability, effectiveness, sustainability, and equity seem very broad to me, overly broad. It would be difficult for me at the end to say that we didn't meet those because they are so broad. I mean, some of the things are listed as examples in here are good examples, but they're not part of the goals themselves. So I'm a little, it seems a little too fluffy to me at this point. I do have feedback on various things. I had an opportunity to meet with, do an advanced briefing by staff, and a couple things that I'm hoping that will be looked at are, right now we're looking at this as Mountain View. TDMs are something that are being looked at across the Bay Area. Traffic is not a Mountain View only issue. The more we could do to look at a process that says if the application for Sunnyvale and the application for Palo Alto and the application for Los Altos look similar, have the similar kind of questions, a similar kind of evaluation process, it will make it easier for the applicants to support it on an ongoing basis. If we could look at the reporting mechanisms that are in place in those cities that they're looking at. I don't know if any or all of them have anything at this point, but the more consistent the reporting methodologies are, particularly from multi-location financial tenants, it would seem to be a good idea that it would help to address some of these issues of ability to support this on an ongoing basis. The other thing that I don't believe is, so I kind of put predictability under the looking like other jurisdictions is maybe under the predictability category, but they're so broad I had a hard time saying for sure. And the other thing that, and I know Commissioner Clark has this commute similar to mine. I know Commissioner Gutierrez has an office down in San Jose, so maybe he's seeing it as well. I don't know that, I can't remember where the vice chair is commuting to, but 3-day work weeks are the reality right now. On Monday, my drive to San Francisco was like driving on a Saturday. When the exit that I got off in San Francisco on Tuesday went from having directly off to the ramp to a half-mile line getting onto the ramp. This morning, my phone routed me to 280, an additional 10-mile drive, because the traffic was so heavy in downtown that going up 101, even though it's shorter, was a longer drive. So sustainable mobility, and we talked a little bit about this in our session, I am very concerned that the metrics that are being used and the evaluations being used are being looked at as something that's kind of an average over a week. And if you take 5 numbers and you add 2 0 and take out 2 numbers and add in a 0, you go from 60% utilization, or from 100% to 60%, which in reality may be more like 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 in the middle of the week. So I'm very concerned that in the sustainable mobility section that we take into account, and I realize the whole country is still making this shit up as they go, okay? But there was an article last week about a company that had previously said everybody's gonna work from home and they're going to actually pay for people to relocate to the Bay Area because they want them in the office 3 days a week. So a program that looks at an average over a 5-day period, I don't believe would be a program that adequately captures whether we're getting that sustainable mobility. As far as I know, there's not a VTA 3-day pass. There's not a Caltrans 3-day pass. So if you're going to try to encourage somebody to take transit, they look at it and say, I got to pay for a whole month versus driving 3 days a week. I'll drive the 3 days a week. So I'm not sure that the programs that we've looked at in the past necessarily are going to work consistently in a world where there are 3-day work weeks. So I think sustainable mobility is a good thing, but if it's looking at it the way we've been looking at it historically, I think we would end up with something it's under assessing the impact of the 3 days a week that people are going to work. And that's a worry to me. So again, sustainable mobility I like, but it's so broad, I don't know whether that's adequately captured there or not. That's my general feedback.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in general, I like where this is headed. I think it's a good program. I like the idea of having it be citywide, and so I'm very much in support with with the main thrust of what we're doing with this. I did have one concern, and I'll just really make it a comment, and this be something that hopefully staff can kind of think about as they're drafting it, and it has to do with compliance, because I was struck in reading the staff report that compliance is a bit of a challenge for these, and I can understand why. And in fact, one of the things that was noted in the staff analysis is that it's kind of hard to get the resources to have the staff to go around and kind of, I guess, collect the information and run the enforcement. There's a cost that comes with that. So, any law we create is only as good as the enforcement of the law. And so, as you're doing this, my hope is that you're thinking about not just how are we going to be able to resource it so that there's whatever staff time it is you need, that that's sufficient to make sure that people are doing what they've agreed to, so that we actually get the greenhouse gas reduction promises that we've asked for. There's another thing I was going to say. In thinking about enforcement, smarter people than me have said, and I think that they're right, it's one thing to make it painful not to follow the law, but it's better to make a law that's easy to follow so you don't have to chase after them. And I think, so for what it's worth, I would simply ask, as you're designing this, the more you can check with the folks that are going to have to live it, to ask them, hey, what would make this super easy for you if you have a new tenant come in? What's going to make it easy for them to know it? The easier we can make this, I think, the better, rather than having a heavy stick. And I'd rather have big carrots. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, I largely agree with what's already been raised in terms of ways to, or at least focus areas. I think the vision statement's fine. I think the high-level goals that you've identified are the right categories with predictability, including consistency, applying things consistently across the board. But I do agree with Commissioner Cranston that I think over time, or as we build these out, I'm sure there will be hopefully some quantifiable outcomes or metrics in each that we're looking at. I know that's easier in things like sustainable mobility with numbers of SOV trips and things like that than maybe some of the other things. But hopefully there will be some ways to quantify some of these things and determine whether they're succeeding or not, and whether we need to tweak anything over time. And then I also agree that I think since we initially started thinking about this and applying TDMs project by project when we were looking at the general plan and some of the precise plans, I do agree with Commissioner Cranston that just looking at averages over a week or a month or something probably won't end up telling the true story, because companies, as you pointed out, have anchor days now, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, and sometimes companies in specific areas will actually deliberately have different anchor days than someone nearby, just because of the just to reduce the congestion and everything associated with it. So I think there are probably post-pandemic themes and things that we can weave into, and I think a lot of that will come through the feedback sessions that we have with folks who've been through this process previously and are going through the current process. And as you've already had a number of these, it looks like over a dozen of these sessions already, or at least a whole bunch of stakeholders. So hopefully we can continue that, and we can tweak this for what we think will be 2025 and beyond, as opposed to pre-2020.
Commissioner Haymeyer.
Thank you. I'll echo what Commissioner Cranston and Clark said. I think the one piece, I like the vision. I think one, and I'm hearing a lot of support so far about the vision as written. I think one piece that would make me a little bit more excited about it is to link it more broadly to the city's aggressive decarbonization goals, and to just tie that in, that's something that we've said citywide, and we're taking all of these steps, and that the TDM is an explicit component of the decarbonization efforts that other parts of the city are working toward. I do want to underscore the piece about hybrid work and ease of compliance. I think Stanford has the longest and most robust TDM program in the region, and I think there are a lot of lessons that could be learned, because there are thousands of people going to the hospital, school, childcare centers, you name it. And so to the extent that we can learn, and I'm happy to connect, just so that you have the benefit of knowing what that's like and different work patterns. But I think that anything that we could do to spell out the project metrics and learn from what Santa Clara County is enforcing with Stanford would be useful, as we're trying to get to the specificity in these 4 broad areas.
Thank you. Any more comments from commissioners? Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah, my understanding is right now we're at this phase 2 of the vision and goal setting. So it seems like in terms of like if we're in the vision board phase of this, yeah, I'm kind of okay with there not being, us not being at the part of the process where the quantified hard metrics are there in terms of like the goals. Obviously, I would agree that's very important. And I would expect that that's something that would be coming along in the process. My big concern, as I'm hearing the conversation and the presentation, is with regards to some of these goals, not so much the level that we're trying to like attain or improve on in terms of like an actual number or metric there, but in terms of like blockers. So one of the things that was really cool about the housing element is there was portion of that was dedicated to assessing what are some of the barriers that currently exist for the city to be able to even achieve whatever housing goal was set for it, right? And so one of the concerns I'm trying to parse through is to what extent, if we said, hey, we want to improve greenhouse gas emissions by X, Y, Z %, and we want to reduce single occupancy trips, or I think maybe Vision Zero is part of this, right? We have these quantifiable metrics that we're going to attain, but what's actually potentially blocking our ability to do that? So, for example, are there infrastructure bottlenecks? Are there lack of connectivity around existing bicycle route connectors? What are the things that are currently the likeliest to impede our ability to attain whatever goal we set for ourselves? And then to what extent are there solutions that can address that so that we actually don't just kind of like put a number on paper and say we're not going to change anything in the material environment, or there's nothing in the material environment that could keep us from getting these goals in reality, and then just kind of failing at the plan. So that's my concern. Other than that, I'm fine with the kind of like high-level themes here with some of the example outcomes. I would feel more comfortable also just knowing what those outcomes were, not necessarily example outcomes. But again, I think we're at the visioning stage of that. So yeah, those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from any other commissioners? It's not working. Okay. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone again. So I agree with the majority of what my colleagues have mentioned, but I'm fairly aggressive. I like things pretty fast, pretty quickly. If you can do it with metrics, it's great. But I feel like we're maybe too overly aggressive on this, and we would need an additional 1 to 2 years to actually get the stats that we need. Because I feel like in 23, we're adjusting. In 24, we're still going to be adjusting. And when I say we, I mean the Bay Area as a whole. Because of comments that have already been shared by my colleagues, I don't need to repeat that perspective. But I feel by 24, 25, we'll have a better idea of what the economy may look like in the Bay Area, how the tech sector and the businesses that we have in the Silicon Valley will react to what then has happened or will happen if we do have a norm again. And then that's going to dictate then the standards that we're looking at for the metrics that we need to enforce an ordinance. That's going to be for the benefit of everyone. As it stands right now, I don't feel too comfortable with the goal of 2024, 25. I don't really see that happening. I know that it looks like there's an ability to possibly revise the standards towards the end at adoption, and I hope that we will be flexible enough at that time to recognize that if we don't have enough to be able to make a decision to move forward, that we would also be not just cautious, but also wise enough to accept that perhaps we would need more time, and that we would be open to that. And one of my concerns is just the local small business aspect to this, right? In the report that you all presented to us, it mentions that there's a lack of resources for these businesses to be able to have a TDM person on site to help them with tracking, collection, and all that comes with it. And if there is no support from the city for them to be able to pitch in at some level, then you're already looking at metrics that are skewed already, right? Because even though you may have a small business here and there, but you add them all up throughout the city, that's a big chunk of folks. And if we're not able to track that somehow, some way, then how effective could this ordinance be? So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Clark, did you have any other comments? No, okay. As for myself, I also generally agree with the overall vision statement. It sounds very good to me. As with others, there are just, little concerns here and there, but I think that's part of the next steps. For sure, this is a multi-prong, comprehensive, long-term project. Obviously, we have a lot of goals in other programs, as stated, decarbonization, greenhouse gases, throughout the city, and using some of those already established metrics is part of the goal. I don't know, we could link them, that's perfectly fine. I think that idea works well too. Obviously for next steps, metrics are important. I do like the idea of that the stakeholders put in, which was to pool resources, and I don't know if that's perhaps per area, per precise plan, or whatever geographic area it is. I'm sure that's something you guys will take a look at. I also wanted to maybe suggest that there's the inclusion of, in the draft for next steps, a draft timeline as well. I know that we might not hit it. Things might be too aggressive, but they're goals, and I think it would be good to put that in. The goal is to have teeth. We need monitoring, enforcement, compliance in order to achieve any goal. So if we move in that direction, I think that would be good. Let's see. I think that is it for my comments. Personally, I'm going to just go over quickly what I've heard from the commission and see if there is consensus for each of these topics, and please chime in if I've missed something. Overall vision, I think we have a vast majority that is in favor. We've discussed needing metrics. I logged down 4, including myself, that was in favor of taking a look at that. There was an issue that Commissioner Cranston had brought forward about the monitoring per day, that we should, in looking at the metrics, not look at weekly, whatever it may be at the end, that it is a little bit more fine-tuned to what the reality is. And I believe Commissioner Clark also gave the nod to that. Were there any others that would want to kind of tag on to that?
Just a concern that the TDMs that I've seen in the past tend to evaluate the trip participation based on an average over a week or a month. And so, and that was started during a time when people were working 5 days a week in general. The reality today is that that many companies are not working 5-day weeks. And so I wanted to make sure that staff looks at, it may be something that still looks at an average for a week, but also takes into account the 3-day work weeks and how peak demand on certain days will affect these, and so that's accounted for in the analysis.
Yeah. As will I, so that takes us up to 4. So we have a majority there. Ease of compliance. I think there was a topic of trying to make the compliance doable and realistic. I'm going to assume you didn't mean make it easy so everyone can attain it as is, but I think that was the overall gist, and please, if I didn't get that, chime in. I have 3 people for that. Wanted to know, 3.5. No, okay, we're halfway there. Incorporating stakeholder input throughout. I'm there. I think that we had 3, but if you don't mind raising your hands, if you, thank you, majority there. Linking some of these goals to some of the existing programs that we have. I believe Commissioner Hammer, yes, 1, 2, yeah, as well. All right, we're there. We also wanted to study infrastructure obstacles and challenges and look at concrete steps to achieve those goals. Commissioner Nunes had brought that up, and I agree with that as far as next steps in the study. 3, okay. Including you, 3, 4, all right. And then, let's see. Incorporating the small businesses, allowing them some room and flexibility to comply. Commissioner Gutierrez, I'm not sure if I have that right, if that was your intention.
Sure, or to investigate further what options does the city plan to provide in case they're not able to, right? Because when I looked at this, it mentioned, well, small businesses may not have the resources, but what are we doing to help them to get there, to help us to meet these goals?
Yes, okay. Commissioner Cranston.
I guess I would agree with that, but with maybe the addition. What I heard in the briefing was that, and my understanding is that TDMs are something that are assigned to the property owner, but the compliance requirements are falling on the businesses that are inside those. And that to me is a problem. And so if the TDM, executing on the TDM is the landlord's responsibility, then dishing it off to the small businesses, particularly if it's a building that has multiple tenants, is actually, they're not, it actually exacerbates the problem. So I would like to see help the small business, but to me, part of it also needs to be looking at, hey, the TDM is owned by the landlord, not by the tenant. And so I would agree with you, but I think it's maybe a bigger item I thought I'd heard.
So having heard that, I'm sure the city can understand the perspective of concern that we have and understand what the request could be.
Do you have enough information to jot that down?
Sorry, how many commissioners would like to support that last comment?
Hold on, sorry. I see that Commissioner Nunes has a comment on that.
Okay.
Thank you for making that distinction. And I agree that exacerbates the problem. To what extent is there not to substitute anything if you're not in agreement with this, Commissioner Gutierrez, and just if this does not alleviate any concern, then please let us know. But to what extent is there a communication or engagement component to this that could go out to small businesses? So for example, when there's like a heritage tree removal, there'll be a notice in my mailbox. To what extent would a ongoing, not just like a one-time basis, but like an ongoing quarterly, like mailing or other type of conveyance to small businesses, hey, like you do not own TDM, it is your landlord's responsibility, and here's a recourse for you if you happen to have that be something that is being hoisted onto you. To what extent is that a good remediation for that possible scenario, and then B, to what extent is that feasible or worthwhile for the city to embark on?
I suppose that's a question for staff.
Yes.
Thank you for the question. Small businesses are definitely going to be part of our stakeholder group that we're going to continue to talk to as we move forward during the drafting of the ordinance and looking at all the options. Whether, what's feasible or not, that will also come with the next steps. But definitely small businesses are going to be a key stakeholder.
Okay, so I guess, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, what I'm hearing then is from the city team, is that you factored in our concerns on that front, and as we go through this process, you will evolve in terms of your approach to how to speak to these issues with both the landlord and, in the case of what Commissioner Cranston had mentioned, should there be multiple businesses in said location, how that would then be addressed by the city at that time. So once you have more of a better idea of how to approach that, you'll let us know.
We do have a couple of study sessions that will be scheduled at a later time once we start into exploring that further based on the stakeholder inputs, and we will return back to our decision makers to provide further information on what we heard and what are some of the strategies that staff would like to explore further.
I've noticed that we have someone from staff, Public Works, who will add additional information for us.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Dawn Cameron, Public Works Director. Really appreciated hearing your comments and questions. They're very informative and will help us with the next step of developing a TDM ordinance. So just to respond to a few things that we've heard tonight, most definitely it is something that we're continuing to look at in terms of, as stated, the TDM ordinance would be applied as conditions of approval on new development. And that rides with the property and the property owner. So yes, you can have a situation with a multi-tenant building, and that building will have TDM requirements on it that affect all the tenants. So it is something we will continue to look into in terms of how we place conditions of approval on the landlord property owner that makes them ultimately responsible, but at the same time, they will have to work with their tenants to help achieve that. So maybe it's the landlord that's helping to provide some of the TDM measures, such as transit passes or something else to help the tenants get their employees using commute alternatives. The other piece that we continue to explore, this is especially important for small businesses and even residential, it's part of this, is continuing to work with the Mountain View Transportation Management Association in terms of them being able to provide support services for the smaller businesses. And one of the things the TMA has been looking at for the last couple of years related to residential projects is, can they bring on a residential commute coordinator that can be shared by multiple residential property owners in terms of working with new tenants, making them aware of what their options are, helping keeping them informed, encouraging them so that it doesn't have to ride with every residential property owner to try to do that themselves. The same could apply to small businesses. So these are things that the city continues to engage with the TMA on and see if we can promote that. And it's another way to pool resources. So these are all implementation tools that we'll continue to look at. One of the comments made that I do want to address, and it's a valid concern, and it has to do with, do we have the infrastructure in place to support promoting people using alternatives to driving their cars? Do we have a complete bicycle network? All ages and ability, preferably a really good network, a really good pedestrian system. What are we doing about transit? So it's one thing to provide transit passes, it's another to make sure the transit is available and will go where people need to go. So we're very aware of all of that. I do want to mention, however, it's not something the TDM ordinance itself can address. And this is about the TDM ordinance. At the same time, we have several other major studies and initiatives underway. They are also council strategic priorities that are happening in parallel. A key one is we're in the middle of developing a new active transportation plan for the city. And this is combining both the bicycle transportation plan and the pedestrian master plan into one document. And, we just took the latest information, existing conditions report to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. That's well underway. So that's a key companion document. And there are other, we have our capital improvement program, of course, which is full of a complete, of an impressive list of active transportation improvements. So on the one hand, I want to assure you, we have a lot of work underway to provide that infrastructure, but the TDM ordinance itself will not be able to specifically address the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. So, right now, you wanted to continue your comment based on, we have a question for you, Don.
Just a quick question. Sorry, what was your last name one more time?
Cameron, Don Cameron.
Okay, thank you for
Thank you.
here, Don. Quick question. Is it standard practice for landlords to have a duty to inform of TDM responsibilities as part of the kind of like lease signing, similar to like rent control? Like, is that a standard practice? Like,
That is the expectation, is that they would be building in any requirements of tenants into the lease.
okay, so it seems like there would be, to the extent that might help out with Commissioner Gutierrez's concern, that might be one avenue for that. And thank you. And then the last thing I wanted to say really quickly about the infrastructure piece, definitely understand that the TDM is not a infrastructure driven component. The comment, and to the extent that, we do have the capital improvement and, the other various kind of like multimodal documentation, I think the comment was relating to, in terms of trying to kind of cobble together a single pane view, what are the blockers that would specifically potentially cause this TDM to fail? Therefore, that way, when we're in the process of reviewing this, we can also look at other plans that would address those blockers and say, okay, we see that they're being addressed in this kind of like way. So just to make sure I wasn't saying, let's address infrastructure here, it was more about having like mutual visibility, as I think you alluded to. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for the clarification, Commissioner.
So it is more of a holistic view, looking at what we already have in play, the multi-prongs all together, to see where this can be improved in the next round.
And it's like, what in the infrastructure would prevent us from being able to realize these goals that we're going to be setting in like 9 months here with these metrics? And if, through our further review of all the other plans that are coming through, we're noticing, hey, bicycle path isn't addressed in any plan, then that's something that can be surfaced appropriately as well, if that's making sense.
Okay. I'm going to ask a quick question. I don't know if in the next round, at what level of detail you guys are getting. I would hope that is the case always as we move along through all of our plans in the city. Is that something that can feasibly be done for the next round, given timing?
Right. Given that
Staff.
stakeholder engagement will continue throughout the length of the project, this is something we'll prioritize in receiving feedback on. And this is something in earlier sessions that we've heard feedback to, which is what are the headwinds that TDM implementers are currently experiencing, whether that be economic, a lack of resources, or a lack of data, and what opportunities are there for staff to close those gaps in existing knowledge. So we'll continue to kind of expand on those areas of deficiency where we don't know where we don't know, and bring that to you to help devise solutions so that we can overcome those barriers that you are identifying. That again could be economic headwinds, that could be financial resources, a lack of data, and just generally how can we kind of strategize for kind of tackling those. But.
And it could also incorporate some of the physical obstacles potentially, or active transportation obstacles, so on and so forth. Okay. So that's already being implemented. All right. Sorry, Commissioner Haymeyer, please.
Yeah, I think just to put a finer point, and Don, you've been really helpful. I think there's a larger issue in terms of one of these headwinds about, as we're building these new projects, energization to the site for level 3 charging, because as we have electric vehicles and more demand on the grid, in terms of thinking about that headwind, we don't have a lot of data, but I know that some of the largest projects that are being constructed now in California are struggling to get that energy to the site. And if these projects that we're looking at are going into effect in 2024, 2025, and beyond, we're getting even closer to the state's goal of our 2035 ban on the sale of internal combustion vehicles. So I think that maybe explicitly calling out the energy requirements that need to be available in order to make the sustainable mobility happen, because we might have a big fleet of electric vehicles and nowhere to charge them, or at least be thinking on that systematic way.
Oh, sorry.
Mine's not working. I'm so sorry.
No,
So
that's
I wanted to
okay.
thank
Please
you
go
for
ahead.
sharing that information with our team here, because that's what I was trying to get to, and I think so was Commissioner Nunez and Cranston. It's an iterative process, and sometimes we know that, but we want to hear those specifics like you shared with us in terms of the behind-the-scenes details, because once we have that, then we feel more comfortable where this is going, right? And that you all are understanding of the concerns we have, and you're monitoring this already. So thank you so much for stepping up and sharing this information with all of us.
So for all the other comments that were made, do we feel comfortable just moving forward? Yes, to the vote. Would someone like to make the motion? Do we need a motion for study session? Not officially, right? Okay. Then we'll call that to an end. And move on to agenda item 6.1, request for amendments to Chapter 36 zoning of the City Code. We'll first have a staff presentation, then questions by the EPC, followed by public comment. At the closure of public comment, the commission will then deliberate and take action. Staff presentation will be from Senior Planner Krisha Penalar and Assistant Community Development Director Lindsay Hagan.
Hello, Commissioners. Krisha Penoy, our Senior Planner, and I'm here to present the amendments to Chapter 36 zoning.
Oh, Krisha, I think we can't hear you.
Okay, this is better. All right. So this year, the proposed amendments are intended for 4 main reasons as shown here. And we'll go through them in this presentation. Some of the publics received reference precise plans, but due to the volume of updates, staff focused on city code only. Staff will come forward with these amendments to the precise plans next year. Please be aware some of these amendments are required per state law and limits how much discretion EPC and staff may have with implementing certain requirements. Staff will highlight these as we go through the presentation. So the first set of amendments are required to ensure consistency with state law and must be adopted. 3 state bills have been adopted that impacts the city's parking regulations. Currently, the code requires minimum parking in most areas of the city. So if a site can't provide the minimum number of parking spaces required by code, they need to go through a public hearing to get a use permit for a parking reduction.
Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulties.
Oh, looks like I was kicked off Zoom. 1 second.
So we apologize for the technical difficulties. We're going to make one more attempt to connect back into Zoom. Unfortunately, if we can't connect back into Zoom, we're going to have to try and just proceed with presenting the presentation. And in the background, we can try to reconnect in the meantime, but just give us one more moment. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Looks like we're back online. Excellent. Thank you so much for that.
Sorry about that. So I'll just start off from this slide. So the first set of amendments are required to ensure consistency with state law and must be adopted. 3 state bills have been adopted, so I think we went over that. So, 1 second. Okay. So currently the code requires minimum parking in most areas of the city. So if a site can't provide the number of minimum parking spaces required by code, they do need to go through a public hearing for a parking reduction. However, as a result of AB 2097, sites within a half-mile of major transit stop no longer have any parking minimums. The map on the right highlights these areas, and the major transit stops have been verified by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. The other 2 bills result in amendments that are intended to capture exceptions to the parking reduction requirements. AB 970, for example, requires EV charging stations to be approved with building permits only. Therefore, the amendments propose planning permit exceptions to allow installation of EV charging stations and associated equipment if it results in the removal of parking stalls below what is required. AB 916 does not permit cities to hold a public hearing for a bedroom addition to multifamily sites. The city's multifamily parking standards, however, are based off bedroom count, so an addition may potentially require a use permit for a parking reduction with existing code. The amendments are intended to exempt bedroom additions from the use permit requirements. Other state laws include introducing a new home occupation called Micro Enterprise Home Kitchen Operations, or MACO for short. This is a type of food facility permitted by the county and state. In addition to introducing this home occupation, staff is also proposing provisions limiting impacts to neighbors, such as proposing hours of operation and outdoor dining. SB 1291 requires hydrogen fueling stations to be a permitted use under certain circumstances. Currently, the city defines this as a service station and requires a conditional use permit. So the text amendments are intended to add hydrogen fueling station as a land use category in alignment with the requirements of state law. However, staff is also proposing additional requirements to limit impacts of noise, prevent on-site circulation issues, and preserve existing heritage trees. Staff is also proposing to add state public noticing requirements for public hearings, which requires newspaper notifications if over 1,000 properties within a 300-foot noticing radius. So the next set of amendments are intended to clarify ADU regulations. One of the most impactful updates permits two-story ADUs. Currently, the code does not permit two-story ADUs, but permits ADUs located entirely to the second story. Staff is proposing maintaining existing regulations, but allowing additional heights consistent with state law, except for attached ADUs. Staff is proposing 28 feet ADUs if attached to a single-family home to match the maximum height of that home. And this lists out the other state laws that were recently adopted. So AB 345 states that the sale of ADUs for nonprofit corporations under certain circumstances are permitted. Currently, the existing code does not permit this. Additionally, existing code allows exceptions to development standards to accommodate 100 square feet ADUs. The amendments add front setbacks as an additional exception that can be requested. Existing code does not require a separate building entrance for JADUs from the single-family home, but now this law is requiring it. Additionally, this law requires an interior entry between single-family homes and JADUs if the JADU does not have a bathroom. Lastly, language is added to ensure consistency with SB 897 to prohibit corrections of non-conforming zoning conditions where an ADU is proposed. And the next set of ADU updates is to clarify existing standards and improve current practices. Staff has been implementing ADU regulations in the past 3 years, resulting in a series of recommended updates. Based on common questions and permitting scenarios, staff has created a list of recommended updates to improve ADU regulations and permitting process. One of the things that the amendments do is replace the user-friendly table noting maximum number of ADUs with direct verbiage from state law, as this is a preference by the Department of Housing, Community, and Development. Standards to architectural features have also been added, such as decks, covered entrances, roof eaves, and stairs. Please note, per previous council direction and implementation of existing ADUs, ADUs are not permitted to have second-story decks. However, staff has added that attached ADUs may have balconies in compliance with the R1 development standards. And lastly, clarification has been added on the development standards that apply to multifamily ADUs. And staff is proposing amendments to exempt square footage associated with an ADU up to 800 square feet. The code currently allows up to an 800 square feet ADU to exceed the maximum FAR for the site. This results in phasing complication for those wanting to do the ADU first and in addition later, as this scenario would not be permitted. The exception to FAR is only for the ADU and cannot be applied retroactively. So this results in maximum FARs for single-family homes wanting to do both an addition and ADU, depending on how they phase the project. These scenarios are shown in the graphic above. Therefore, this amendment will resolve this phasing issue. The housing element also identified text amendments to be in compliance with state law and to facilitate additional housing development and remove barriers to different types of housing. AB 101 is for low barrier navigation centers. This is a type of service-rich temporary shelter that would be permitted in mixed-use areas and non-residential zoning districts, allowing residential uses and mixed use in alignment with state law. Although not required by state law, staff is also proposing on allowing low-barrier navigation centers in areas already allowing emergency shelters. Staff is also adding in an employee housing land use category in alignment with state law. These would be permitted in residential zones and agricultural zones. Lastly, to implement state law, the amendments will allow mobile home parks in all residential zones. The amendments also remove barriers for certain housing types. For residential care homes, the amendments change residential care homes to be a permitted use regardless of the number of clients. For reasonable accommodations, the amendments are proposing to remove subjective findings that are required to be made for these types of housing types, as these can be seen as a barrier. And lastly, the amendments remove minimum parking standards for 100% affordable housing projects. Although not required by the housing element, staff is also proposing in adding bicycle parking requirements. Other amendments are intended to clarify existing procedures to update the code to reflect current practices. These include updating the code to reflect the current role of the DRC, or Development Review Committee, which has evolved over the years to be a consulting body that advises the zoning administrator and staff regarding design. The amendments also clarify permit extension timeframes. We have also added only reviewing one application for a new development project at a time, as this can be confusing to the public if multiple applications are reviewed at the same time. We're also including verbiage to increase the noticing radius for sites adjacent to city-owned properties. Per council direction, the 750-foot notice radius would be taken from both the project site and city-owned property. The amendments also provide information regarding the intent and process of informal applications, as this was not codified. It would allow notice of permit decisions to be emailed, as previously it only required to be mailed. We're also clarifying the inactive permit closeout dates to note 90 days instead of 3 months. And we are also updating the review authority table to reflect the current practice and encompasses the changes made to DRC. This will also add ministerial housing approvals mandated by state bills and extensions. Other items include adding design standards for equipment screening, adding a definition for studio use, and clarifying second-story setback requirements above a garage on R1 lots. We're also adding general development standards for industrial zones and providing general provisions. The moving building section was added from Chapter 8 to this chapter as it discusses planning permit requirements. Staff is also correcting parking requirements that were incorrect. The row house guest parking standards was accidentally added to the townhouse development standards, so this has been moved. Bicycle parking facility, it correctly references Class 2 facilities, but should reference Class 1, and other grammatical and reformatting edits have been made. So due to COVID, the code updates were fairly irregular. Moving forward, EPC should be anticipating a series of code amendments to occur on an annual and biannual basis. In terms of next steps for this round of code amendments, the Airport Land Use Commission is scheduled for November, followed by City Council, tentatively scheduled for December 5th. Afterwards, we do need to finalize the code amendments and send them to the Department of Housing, Community and Development. And we will continue to partner with the Santa Clara County Planning Collaborative and upload our updated guidelines and ADU requirements on their website. So in conclusion, this project is exempt from CEQA. Staff recommends that EPC recommend council to adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 36. Be aware that other city code amendments to other chapters are proposed as part of these amendments and will be reviewed by the council along with these Chapter 36 amendments after EPC recommendation. And thank you for your time. Staff will be available for any questions you may have.
Thank you. So we will now move to EPC questions. Does anyone have any for staff? Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two questions, and bear with me here, team, because I am not a homeowner, okay? I rent. But this one email came into the team, and it caught my eye, and it dealt with a homeowner and their question of a balcony. Can they have a balcony that can face inwards as opposed to outwards towards a neighbor? So I need your help to clarify. Is that possible with the updated guidelines that we have here, or is that not possible?
So currently, the guidelines for an ADU with a detached ADU would not be allowed to have any balcony. But if it's an ADU attached to the main house, they are permitted to have a balcony that meets the typical R1 standards.
So it's based on that standard alone that will determine whether or not they have an option.
Correct.
All right. And then my second question then is, another email came in from the Chamber of Commerce, and it goes to the issue of reviewing one planning application at a time. So I need to ask you, I'd like to ask because I'm curious about this as well, right? How often do you get plans that are submitted to you that are more than one? And is that really an issue to the point where you have to propose this to just have it be one per instance?
It's a great question. Appreciate the question, Commissioner. So it doesn't happen frequently for new development. We do see it very often for existing sites, and that's why we added language explicitly saying that simultaneous permitting can happen for an existing site. But we have found that in the cases where we do have a new development project and they are proposing multiple developments, you know, varying in their degree, that it is very confusing to the public. And it's not clear to the public in terms of what we've heard feedback on which project's moving forward, why is this one being considered and not this other one, and sort of there just being a lot of confusion around it, as well as it's not a time issue, it's not a resource issue. You know, they have to pay fees no matter what. But really, it does complicate the environmental review process, for example, because we would have to review both projects. So those are sort of some of the reasoning in terms of why we're proposing it.
Okay, so then my follow-up question would be then, if it's an issue with the public and them understanding the multiple projects that are being looked at by our team in general, but it's not really an issue for you all to be able to see those multiple plans, aren't we limiting then the best possible option that the city could have? Hypothetically speaking, if you have more than one plan, one of the two, or one of the three, or one of the four, depending on how many times they submit a plan and pay their fees, it seems like we're taking away a right for the ideas to be presented to the city to then have a best possible option and outcome for the city of Mountain View.
I appreciate the feedback. I think what we often see is we can have informal conversations with applicants, and so they may come to us with initial ideas. There might be some iterations that go back and forth. And so I think why we don't see a lot of scenarios where people are submitting multiple applications is because they've, you know, had some of those conversations before. And quite frankly, a lot of applicants don't want to put even that much of their own resources behind multiple applications, because that's more time paying architects and other people to do all the work. So that's sort of some of the situations around it. But I'd say at the end of the day, a private party can propose whatever they want to propose to us for us to review. So I don't think we're viewing it as a way to limit someone's options. It's just, it's a way to address, you know, and reduce potential confusion.
Okay, because I'm still confused, because if it's not really an issue and they can submit more than one, but with this amendment, we're letting them know that they can't.
And I think for us, it was a way or an idea for how to address and reduce confusion for the public, is to only allow one new development application at a time.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Clark?
I had a few questions along similar lines and then a few others. So let's take the scenario of a detached ADU. Let's say you have, Mountain View still has a lot of legacy, like rectangular long lots. So someone might put a detached ADU in the back. And I think it can be, if it's outside the transit corridor rules, it can be 16 feet, and then within it's 18. So I guess to Commissioner Gutierrez's point, I don't think a second, I guess in this case we'd be prohibiting a second story balcony even if it was looking in toward the lot and the main home, is the proposal.
So I just want to clarify, currently the regulations for ADUs don't allow second story balconies, whether they're attached or detached. Yeah. The argument that's been made, which we've seen play out, is, and what we're proposing here as part of this collection of amendments is if I have an attached ADU and I want to put a balcony in, second-story balcony that complies with the R1, same regulations as my house, why should it matter, right? And I think so we've proposed amendments where it would allow it for an attached ADU that meets the R1, single-family standards. So this would be expanding what can't happen today. Right. I think with the detached ADUs, that's, it's existing that it's prohibited, so we're not proposing to add language as part of this package. But
understood.
Yeah.
Okay. But state law doesn't prohibit it. We're basically carrying forward that prohibition.
Correct.
Okay. And then there's a total prohibition on roof decks, attached or detached. I just want to make sure I read that right.
Yes, that's correct.
And then for new development, one application at a time. I guess, what is the scenario where there must be reasons why people do this? So I'm trying to figure out what is the most common scenario where someone's submitting more than one application? Like, are both applications technically active at once? Do they have to designate one as inactive and a primary one as active? Or, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out, because then there are other permit processes, right? There's plumbing, electrical, MEP. I'm just trying to figure out.
So in terms of where, we've seen communities that receive multiple applications, it does tend to be the larger cities. So I know the example was given of the city of San Jose. They frequently have that scenario. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the main reasons is it takes quite a while to get through the San Jose process. So they hedge their bets and sort of submit 2 ideas and see kind of where it can go. So you do see that play out in San Francisco, San Jose, the bigger communities, LA. It's less common in smaller communities, but I will say, I don't think we can pretend to know all the reasons why, so one of them is definitely about sort of hedging bets in a process that can be lengthy and cumbersome. And then oftentimes, when I've seen scenarios of it, it's usually completely different types of projects. It's not usually like a slight variation. It's somebody wants to come in with an office idea and somebody wants to come in, and the other idea is a residential one. And so you'll sort of see how that plays out.
I see. Yeah, I'm familiar with San Francisco and a lot of those multiple applications, but I was just curious in a smaller community how that plays out. And then are there any other communities like us, our size, that limit applications to one at a time, or are we sort of taking the initiative here just because we've heard feedback from the public that it's confusing?
In terms of what I can say I've heard from other communities is that they sort of will not accept second application. So they just sort of, whether you call that formal or informal, they just won't accept it. But there are other cities out there that do have a limit on applications.
And so if someone wanted to submit a second application, you would just ask them, they would need to withdraw the initial one, or you'd make it inactive or put it on ice or something formally?
Yeah, so if this language gets adopted into the code, it would allow us to say we can't accept your application, or you have to withdraw your other application and submit this one. And just to address one of your other earlier comments, because we already have a 3-month or 90-day inactive requirement in our code, that's another challenge already that our code has in terms of if somebody wanted to come in with multiple applications, they have to still keep all their applications alive. So they have to keep submitting and progressing forward within that 90-day requirement timeframe. So, we already sort of have a built-in motive for people to keep moving forward in a process. And that was intentional, just to ensure that we don't have kind of languishing projects. So that's another feature we already have in our code that does already sort of make it challenging if somebody wanted to try and submit, 2 applications.
On the clarification about the DRC's role, is the intent, since DRC is now mostly acting as a in more of a consulting capacity for the ZA. Do we anticipate them like still holding, public meetings and reviews about projects, or are we just formalizing that, they're going to act as consultants, and if they do anything publicly, it would be at a ZA hearing?
Yeah, so it's to memorialize how DRC acts today. So they will continue holding meetings that the public can attend.
Got it. And then one minor thing on rooftop equipment screening. So it mentioned thank you for providing the red line. There was a reference to an exceptions process, and I'm thinking about a scenario where you have, a 4 or 5 story building. Maybe you've got really tall equipment, and having the screens match the exact height adds bulk to the building. But if they could be lower, because if you're at ground level looking up, you don't need, the height of that screen to necessarily match the height of the equipment just because of the sight line. I assume part of the exception process or part of the work that you would do would be to identify situations where the screen itself wouldn't necessarily need to numerically match the height of the equipment.
The way the code amendment is, well, a couple things. The exception that's in our code today is actually about allowing greater height of a screen to kind of screen extra tall equipment. Mm-hmm. But the amendment that's proposed, it actually wouldn't allow the flexibility that you're speaking to. And I think part of the challenge that we've seen over the years in, dealing with roof screens is that while you may want to design everything to the sidewalk level, there's a lot of roadways and other things that are raised that are not at that level. And so you end up being able to see the equipment. And so I think part of the challenge here was trying to balance that. And so by making it equally as tall as the equipment, there's a lot lower chance that you'd be able to see it even along a raised condition.
Okay. And then the last question, the definition of high-frequency transit corridor, that just ties back to some other definition that's set by someone else, right? Because someone asked, does El Camino Real qualify because of the bus service? I assume we would figure that out based on the definition that's defined
Yeah,
elsewhere by the
correct.
state. Okay.
Correct.
And one thing, sorry, I'll just add, because I think it's an important point to clarify. The way that the law is written and the definition's written, it's based on service levels. So while today it only counts our transit stops and our hard rail lines, the Caltrain station and the light rail, in the future, if bus service expands dramatically on El Camino and we now can meet the definition of a major transit stop, then technically that would become part of this. So it is kind of one of those regulations that it evolves over time based on service levels.
It's 15 minutes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cranston, you're next.
Okay, several questions. A follow-up to Commissioner Clark's question. My interpretation of the DRC is it doesn't actually change or add any more meetings whatsoever, correct? One of the letters from the chamber kind of they seemed to have the impression that maybe it was adding more meetings, and I didn't read it that way, and I'm looking for staff's feedback on that.
Correct. So we're not changing any of the process. Okay. So how there are public meetings today, there would continue to be public meetings, agendas, okay. So it would be the same. There would be no additional meetings.
Okay. Second question is, and maybe this is just because I couldn't figure it out. 916, where you're adding space, does that mean you're taking a big apartment and adding more walls to make it multiple bedrooms? Is that?
Yeah, it's within the existing footprint of the building.
Okay.
Correct.
That was confusing to me. Third question, and it's related to similar to what we are not voting on the map. The map that's in here for the transit areas is not something that's part of the ordinance. Like you said, it added if it was on there and the Evelyn VTA station that was there would have been part of it. When it went away, it would go away. So we're not voting on the map. Okay, so the map is not
Correct,
something-
correct.
okay,
The way the
that's-
amendments are written, it references the definition.
That's what I thought. Okay. Third question. Do non-city owned government properties have a noticing requirement?
Yes, private development owned by a private property is required to take 750 feet noticing radius.
What I'm talking about, so we talked about you're going to add it into city-owned properties. What if it's the post office? What if it's a school site? What if it's Moffett? Okay, do they have noticing requirements as well?
No, so this stems from a development project in downtown next to the Pioneer Park here. And the idea of this amendment is that if you're doing a new development next to city-owned land, so it only applies to city-owned land is what we're proposing here, it would expand the noticing radius to include the project site and the city property, just to make it more people get notified. The way it's drafted, it would not apply to other government-owned properties, like the post office, which is owned by the U.S. government. So that's not currently.
Are there noticing requirements for those kind of properties?
Not anything different than any other private development here in our current code.
And then on the studio definition, does studio include what I would call kind of a loft, where it's a live-work space?
No, that's a separate land use category.
Okay, I couldn't find it. I think that was my questions. Thanks.
Any other questions from other commissioners? Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple of questions about MECOs, which is something new that I did not know very much about. Are they permitted in single-family residences like R1 only, or is it permitted in multifamily, R2, R3?
Yeah, they're permitted in both.
They're permitted in all those different types
In
of
residential, yeah.
residential areas. Okay. I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to hear you tell me. I assume alcohol cannot be served. If somebody's running a restaurant out of their house, what do you do with alcohol? Is it on the table, off the table?
Yeah, I believe the county references saying that they need to reach out to ABC. I would have to look in to see if ABC would permit a separate liquor license for that.
Okay. One of the things that I noticed in the ordinance, it said you can't have, I think, noise impacts beyond the property line. So in a multifamily setting, the property line, everybody's within the property line. And so I would read that as saying if you're in an apartment building, there's no protection written into that particular part of the ordinance that protects against noise going down the hall into other houses, things like that. That would be concerning to me. I won't do comments. I'm curious to know when you say property line, how that impacts a multifamily dwelling.
So the way it's drafted and staff's intent is that it is measured from the property line itself, not from a unit. So in terms of, I think what you're outlining would be a concern within a multi-unit building and kind of impacts to other units. That is not something staff's proposed, to address in these amendments, but so yeah, the current noise is really just referencing from the property line itself.
Gotcha. Okay. And so last question, I understand that you've said it's okay to essentially run a large barbecue smoker in your backyard, that's it's outdoor cooking, so that would be permitted, unless I understand differently, right? And the large outdoor smoker that you could run in your backyard, and I'm super pro barbecue, just so that's clear to everybody, that could run and smoke throughout the entire period where you're allowed to be open? So that could run all day, right at the property line.
Currently, the way that the amendments are written, there wouldn't be any limitations that we've proposed on that.
Okay.
But if that's feedback from the EPC, that's something you could provide to us.
Thank you.
Commissioner Haymeyer.
Thank you. And I think this was asked, but I want to make sure I understand. So the map there's some discrepancy around the rapid BTA bus and the bus 22 and 522 as major transit stops. My understanding is that map isn't for us to comment on, but staff is working with the state to identify if that's in. Yes, that's what I heard earlier. Okay, just want to double check. And then can you talk me through a little bit about why the city is choosing, like why is the proposal to mandate parking for hotel space?
So that's actually verbiage from AB 2097 that states that we can require parking for hotels.
We can, but it's not necessary, right? Like, I mean, it's a choice.
It would be a policy decision for us to do something other than what's written in the state law. So what we've proposed here is just what's in state law.
Just compliance. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Gutierrez, an additional?
Sure. I have one more question. Being that I hadn't been asked, so I feel compelled to share this with the community since it was brought to us also by, I believe, the League of Women Voters. And the question is, why was the issue, and let me know if this is the wrong assumption, okay? But why was the issue of base density under state density bonus left unaddressed?
It's a great question. So a couple things. Any law that's in place today, because there was a couple different public comments about different laws that are in place today, the city staff is implementing. We're required to implement it, so we are implementing it. Part of what we're trying to do over these many years, I'm sure, is make sure our code aligns with state law. So one of the items about density bonus law, which is what you're referencing, there's a couple different laws that have come out that we are currently assessing our density bonus regulations. So if we need to make tweaks, we will, and that will be part of a separate package of amendments. But again, just based on the volume of these amendments, we kind of had to cut it off somewhere. And so that is something we are looking at, and we are still abiding by it today.
Great. So as a follow-up, if and when that does become an issue where it needs to be adjusted, then what I'm hearing is that your team will present that to the EPC and the rest of the governing bodies so that we'll be aware of what these new packaged amendments would look like, and we can go through that step-by-step process once it comes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great. No additional questions from other commissioners? Okay, I just had a couple. I think the rest were covered. One was with the MACOs, the micro kitchens in the homes. Who enforces the noise and all these other regulations about the trips? You can't go beyond 5 trips.
So in terms of noise, code enforcement will actually go out to sites and use the noise monitor if there are complaints on a property to ensure that they're complying or not complying with local noise ordinance.
Okay, and yeah, a follow-up question was regarding the trips. I think it was stated that, you can't go 5 beyond what's considered normal. I'm paraphrasing here, and I was curious what normal was, and then who enforces that?
So it's a great question. So the trip number that's in there is not applicable to MACOs. So MACOs are exempt from that. The state law doesn't allow us to apply that. The 5 trips is in our existing code for existing housing home occupations. And so that's been in our code for many, many years. So it's applicable to those, not specifically to MACOs. In terms of, so I don't know if that addresses your question exactly. Did that?
No, it clarifies it. Yeah, thank you. I was under the wrong assumption then in that case. As far as the ADUs and the balconies, I know you had mentioned that City Council had already said they didn't want to see balconies on the ADUs. Was that for aesthetics, do you recall, or was it for privacy issues?
So actually, council weighed in on duo developments which has similar setback requirements as ADUs. And they did note, because of privacy concerns, they didn't want to have balconies on those 4-foot duo developments.
Okay, thank you. Another question was regarding the hydrogen refueling stations. I'm going to assume that is a hazardous material, and everywhere else in the zoning code where they reference things cannot be built within, I don't know how far or next to or adjacent to hazardous material storage facilities or places that sell it, that will just get tied in by the fact that you call it out as hazardous materials, or it's just known?
Yeah, correct. So hydrogen fueling stations are considered a hazardous material.
Okay. So
And just to clarify further, because I think kind of what maybe your question's sort of getting at is the other sensitive land uses that it might be potentially nearby. So in the scenario where there might be a hydrogen fueling station and say a child care center, which is considered a highly sensitive use because it has children under the age of 16 in this case, when those proposals come in, that is definitely something that staff verifies proximity in those situations and verifies compliance with our other code requirements.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, what happens when there is a refueling station or another sensitive material facility, and then there's an application to apply residential nearby? Does it just get denied flat out because there already is an existing?
So our hazardous material standards and requirements are part of our fire requirements. So there's a whole special section of our code about all the standards about that. And so I know, I'm definitely not an expert in it, but I know that it has already regulations built in that if you can't comply with it, then you can't get a permit to have that hazmat material on your site. So that's partly, I guess, a way to build in some of those protections. And then the other piece of it, which is in the zoning code, is about the highly sensitive uses and how there has to be a buffer from extremely hazardous materials. So I think sort of with those two existing regulations, you do kind of capture some of those potential incompatibilities.
Okay.
Yeah, and I do want to add clarification on hydrogen fueling stations is although it's permitted, if there's a residential use on a commercial or industrial site, they would not be a permitted use.
Okay, because it's only allowed in those zones. Okay, got it. And then there was one question about the rooftop utilities and the screening. Is there anything in the code language that describes a setback of those extra tall utilities so that they're not right up against the edge and highly visible, that would allow for lower screening and take care of a lot of some of the
we currently
issues?
don't have it in our zoning ordinance, but some of our precise plans have that. It's just sometimes difficult to meet with existing infrastructure.
I see, okay. And I guess you're doing it at staff level when you're reviewing the development application?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions on my end. No further questions, then we will move on to public comments. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please check the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, I believe we do have public comments.
Yes, we have one in-person speaker, Salim.
I'm Salim. I wanted to speak. Is there a timer? Thank you. I wanted to speak on AB 2097 and also the cap on permit applications. So first, AB 2097. There's a safe interpretation of the code, the government code, and a riskier interpretation. The safe interpretation is that a major transit stop exists when there's the intersection of two bus lines, even if the two bus lines are completely overlapping, as is the case with the 22 and the 522. The riskier interpretation is that they're not. It's true that the code that that's put in front of you today is is not something you would ever need to change in the future. The question is, what is staff going to do between passing the code and getting clarification from HCD? What will they tell applicants they have to do regarding parking requirements? And the safe thing to do would be to follow the advice of MTC and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, rather than waiting for HCD to get back. we already know what the position of those two agencies are when they looked at this. We don't know what the position of HCD is. We had to hire a consultant to get HCD's advice on our housing element. HCD has a lot on its plate. It might take a while. We don't know how long it would take. The safer thing to do would be to look at the guidance of agencies that have already spoken on that issue. The second thing I want to talk about is the cap on permit applications. This seems like a solution in search of a problem. It has clear implications on the viability of certain housing projects. The reason developers will go through the extra cost of proposing an extra of adding an extra application is that they're worried one of their applications will not get through or won't be feasible, and so they're hedging their bets, as staff said. So this clearly has a detrimental effect on development, like a very serious detrimental effect on development. And the only reason you would consider this is this nebulous claim that the public is confused about concurrent applications. If that's the case, the obvious solution is just communicate in a more effective way. You could ask the developer, what's your preferred plan? And then label that plan A, and ask, what's your second preferred plan? And label that plan B. And that would clarify exactly what the developer is trying to do in a given situation. Additionally, I think it's a lot more confusing when there's a long history of permit applications for a single project. For example, like with 555 West Middlefield, it took me forever to figure out what happened there. And it also took a very long time to figure out how do you cohere the guidance from multiple councils that were elected in different elections that all spoke on the same project. This was also listed as a clarification to the zoning code. It was not a clarification. It's a policy direction change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
We have one virtual speaker, Leona.
Hello, how are you all? My name is Leona. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My questions and comments related to the ADUs, and I am thankful that I emailed all of the people on the commission and it did get discussed briefly in the comments that had already been happening, but I just wanted to cover 2 points actually. And the first one was just in relation to the allowable height of a two-story ADU. SB 897 sets the maximum height limitation that may be imposed by a local agency on an ADU of 18 feet. And I just wondered if the Mountain View Council is able to approve a higher limit on that if they choose. Because 18 feet is a very restrictive height for a two-story structure. It doesn't promote premium aesthetics, and it basically means that you have to have a flat roof on your two-story ADU. And a duo, the code is exactly the same setback. It's 4 feet from the boundaries, and you're allowed to build 28 feet high under that code. And I just wondered if the ADU code could also have a two-story height allowance that was somewhere more like 22 or 28 feet high. My second comment related to the balconies, and this is what was already discussed, but I did just want to say that I can appreciate that you need to be considerate of neighbours and ensure that their privacy is protected. But couldn't this be done by specifying in the code that an ADU's balcony just needs to have the same setbacks as a balcony on a single family, use the R1 code, just to enable someone that is building an ADU, if it is detached, in their backyard and has no issues for privacy for the neighbours, having the opportunity to have a balcony is awesome. It's kind of why we all, having the outdoor opportunity is kind of why we all live in California. So I'd really like to encourage the committee to consider asking for changes to the rules to enable these decks and to let people have a detached ADU as long as they do meet the requirement and the setbacks of a single family R1 zoned home. Thanks very much for the time. Much appreciated.
Thank you. No more public comments?
No.
Okay. So now we'll move on to EPC deliberation and action. Are there any commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to briefly follow up on what was presented in terms of possible edits to what we have here before us. And one would be in terms of the balconies in general, especially when they're facing inwards. as it was presented just now by Leona. And then the other issue would be seeing if there's consensus to not include the limitations of permits that are allowed by developers. Those are the two things that I'd like to see if we can get consensus on that. And then just a point of clarification for Hank. Because I do live in apartments, I understood your question clearly, and from that perspective, in terms of, well, what's going on with a noise situation if you're in a certain type of living accommodation. And I can safely say that within the last, I don't know, 25 years that I've lived in an apartment within Mountain View, we have there's rules like that already established, where those standards are discussed and you agree on making sure that you're not going to be causing a ruckus, right? Because if you are, here comes the manager and here comes the complaints. So though it's not stated directly here with what we're showing, it is covered under the other auspices of oversight that we have in place within those living communities as well. So thank you.
Just to clarify, were you making a motion?
Well, I'm not making a motion yet because there's no, I don't think that there's a consensus for bringing one up. So I figured to bring those subject matters up as questions to the fellow members of the committee so that if they are interested in possibly doing those types of edits, then we can come up with a motion to do just that.
Okay. Any other commissioners? Oh, sorry. Commissioner Clark.
So I'll just share my opinions like Commissioner Gutierrez did and see where the chips fall. I know it's kind of a weird concern, but I'll start with the roof equipment screening. So, and I'll just give the example of the multifamily building that I live in, which was built probably in the last 5-ish years, I think. So they've concentrated all the mechanical equipment in the center of the roof. So it's but it's a reasonably, I think it's like a 4-story building. So, and some of the stuff is pretty tall. So you can see it from ground level if you're a block away on the sidewalk. And what they did was to comply with the screening, they put up these panels all the way around the building on the roof. And they're a certain height to where they don't match the height of the equipment, because if they match the height of something like a boiler, they'd be really tall. But they're tall enough that if you're down on the sidewalk or something, you're not going to see the top of the boiler. My concern about removing the ability to have those be shorter than the rooftop equipment is that in a case like that, you're going to have really tall screens, and I know that clearly you want them to architecturally match the building, but it creates this mass, and it almost looks like a half of in some cases it could look like an extra half a floor. So maybe it's fine architecturally. Maybe the screens can be a little bit more sophisticated than ours are and look something different than just color matched panels. And maybe that's the intent, which is perfectly fine. But I question whether removing that ability for flexibility makes sense. But at the end of the day, staff probably knows best, and there's probably reasons for this, but I personally don't have issues looking at the tops of boilers and things. I'd rather look at I care more about the perimeter of the building than I care about what's in the middle of a roof. But anyway, small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. I feel like I've been on this never-ending quest for outdoor space for folks in Mountain View because we have a great climate. We have, once you get to a second story, you can sometimes see some of the beautiful scenery around here. And I totally get the council's concerns about balconies and other things that would overlook, a fence line into a neighbor. But when you look at detached ADUs, you're mostly looking at these rectangular longer lots where you're going to have a primary residence at the close to the street, and you're going to be putting this detached ADU toward somewhere in the back of that lot, and you're probably going to have some sort of amenity space, maybe a seating area or something in the yard that between the two, And I don't personally have any issue with someone having an inward-facing balcony to just overlook that yard or the amenity space where you're not overlooking, you're not looking at the other side of the fence or into anyone else or bothering anyone else, especially if we're only allowing 16 or 18 feet. So I realize that creates other issues of having to, come up with what the rules and regulations are for those inward-facing balconies. But I personally, I think we do folks a disservice to limit those. I also think that they shouldn't be limited to 16 feet. I think something that better matches our current allowances for primary structures makes more sense, but I know that others will probably disagree with that, which is perfectly fine. And then the other thing that I really believe that anyone in Mountain View, whether you're in an apartment complex, a single-family home, I just think we should get used to having. We have rooftop solar. Rooftop amenities should be something that's offered to anyone who has the ability to produce them. So I think the total ban on any sort of roof amenity on an ADU or anything like that just doesn't make sense. I could see if you have an attached ADU that you're only allowed to have 2 stories, that might not be as tall as the main residence, and just having a little patio or roofish area on that isn't truly the roof of the main structure could be a nice amenity for someone there. So those are my thoughts. I can personally go either way on the limit to 1 application at a time. I understand staff's concern, and I have experienced, or I've seen comments from the public where they assume that they find 1 application, they're really worried about it, but the reality is that one's mostly dormant, and another one is kind of the primary one that's moving forward, and it creates some confusion there. But if there are, if limiting it to 1 at a time is overkill in terms of how we address that, then I'm open to how others feel about that. But otherwise, I think staff's done a great job with incorporating all the cleanup. It's been a while, and there are a lot of changes, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. So I just have those 2 or 3 concerns.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Nunes, you're next.
Yeah, I just, not to rehash the map situation, but I did kind of want to get some clarification on the overlapping bus lines on the 22, 522, and the extent to which staff deems and feels it likely that that is considered an intersecting bus line or bus stop.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So to clarify, staff's been communicating with MTC since this law's been in effect, and we knew it was coming. And we've even met regionally with cities, staff from every city in the county. And while a couple of cities have heard different information, the reality is the communication we've been getting directly from MTC is that the stops in Mountain View on El Camino do not qualify, as well as in other communities in the county. So that's direction we've based this map on. And so we feel, we're just kind of aligning with what direction we've received at this point.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll start off by kind of speaking a little bit to that issue and then going into the rest of them. Personally, having been in a position, this is almost embarrassing to say, having been in a position recently where I kind of had to take the bus from the airport, which is embarrassing for several reasons I won't get into. In terms of actually, I was shocked how easy it was to take the bus from the airport to my house. It was it was shockingly easy and cheap. And I just thought wow, if I didn't have a car, that was pretty reasonable and easy in terms of kind of like, walking out to the curb and hopping on to some other international destination potentially. So to the extent that we aren't more proactively expanding opportunities to not maintain, to have to sustain vehicle ownership as far as residency goes around the El Camino corridor, especially when it seems like the majority of our El Camino corridor would fall under this, and we're not going to just kind of like go ahead and do the proactive thing to just incorporate the rest of that. I understand that there's like going with like the minimum viable aspect of what we are being required to do, but I will maintain that having us just discussed TDM and saying, hey, we're gonna really look for ways to reduce vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas, single occupancy vehicle, I just want to point out that this does not feel congruent with our previous conversation around what our intended goals are. In terms of the ADU balcony components, yeah, I mean, I was opposed to these restrictions when the duos came up. I'm opposed to them now. I think that there's no reason to be minimizing people's abilities to enjoy their life in our city if they can so do it. Privacy concerns, I don't know if that's like a specific finding that can be made in reference to any kind of like codified law or other part of our code. I'm not a homeowner, so maybe I should be a homeowner and then I'll understand what that's like. But for me personally, I don't really think that's a necessary, that I have no support for that at all. With regards to the height limit on the ADU, I just want to get a clarification on that because I did read in the staff report. It did say that the state law is imposing an 18-foot height restriction, right? So that is a state law requirement, and we don't have discretion around allowing a higher use for detached ADUs. Am I correct about that, or was I misreading that?
So actually, you do have some discretion in allowing a taller height, but the minimum required is at 18 feet.
Okay. And so what were, thank you, actually. And so then what were the findings for like leaving it at 18?
So our proposed amendments are just to align with state law. And right now, as I think was maybe previously mentioned, our current code only allows 16 feet. So this increases it to 18 to align with state. However, if EPC wants to recommend an additional height, just so everyone knows, the height of a two-story single-family home is 28 feet.
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily think there's like a prescriptive number I would have in mind, except I would definitely say I'm supportive of kind of not being that restrictive necessarily. Maybe staff can go back and see what's like a happy middle ground between that 28 and the 18, but I tend to agree that like 9 feet, that's like my ceiling is 9 feet. Like I can legitly feel the kind of cloisteredness of that. And so to the extent other people are supportive of that, that's something I'm supportive. I'm also supportive of the equipment thing that Commissioner Clark brought up. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm happy to jump on that bandwagon. And I'll just kind of leave those comments there for people to know where I stand.
Just to clarify, you said you were also in favor of Commissioner Clark's rooftop screening being not as, got it.
I also don't, just to this, I forgot what I was going to say. The application component, I like I'm never in favor. It sounds like that scenario of departments in Los Angeles, San Jose, LA, kind of getting these applications as kind of like a hedging of the bets kind of situation. I have no desire to see kind of like private enterprise kind of try and pull one over on limited public resourcing. So that's like one kind of thing that's tugging at me. But then I guess I did want to maybe just ask, is there a possible way where maybe that can be modified in such a way where it says, and this is a question for staff, to what extent is it feasible, attractive, desirable to have some modification where it's almost like, you have an ability to deny a kind of second application with specific findings, or is that something that's already in place? Can you give me some more insight into that part of it?
It's a good question. I don't know that we've thought through a scenario where we would have to make findings to deny a project. I think
application.
I'm sorry, an application. So we'd have to look into something like that, kind of what the qualifiers might be.
Like not like a rigorous we've done it, but like to the extent that there is some reasoning that's going out to people saying, hey, almost like having a assumption of acceptance with a ability to reject pursuant to some finding that again isn't like overly rigorous, but is also sufficient enough to like meet the public standard for some kind of like information requirement that we would have to the public. So withstanding that, I'm inclined to not be as supportive to that kind of like limitation on the application, but that's another path forward if anyone was interested in kind of going that route.
Commissioner Cranston.
So one brief question first. I'm aware of a site that has 2 applications, but one came in under the pre-housing element approval. What happens to existing situations where there's more than one application if this is passed? Do they have to choose one and let one go away, or if there's a site where there's 2 applications a day, will they be grandfathered and be able to continue down the path of those 2 applications in parallel?
Thank you, Commissioner Cranston. The amendments would be prospective, so if there is a project or a site that has 2 applications pending, they would continue forward until one application was withdrawn or an application is approved.
Okay. So in general, I'm supportive of Commissioner Clark's increased flexibility on roof things. I think quite frankly, we have enough things in place. So I'd be more, I don't feel strongly about it, but I'm not as inclined to approve the 1 application restriction. But I would, if there's a majority in favor of removing that, I would probably vote with the majority. ADUs, this whole body met and talked about this. Okay, the changes that staff is proposing are expanding their capabilities. The one thing that I've heard that I might be open to is an internally facing balcony. Okay? Something that's looking into the property. That's not unusual. All the other numbers we talked about when we went through the duos, the heights, what we're doing is we're increasing the numbers in line with state law. I'm not interested in looking at those things further, with the exception of something that's an inward facing, because that's apartment complexes have inward facing stuff, other developments do. A discussion around policy on the map, I view as, quite frankly, Ms. Attorney, view that as beyond the scope of what's been noticed for this meeting and would not be open to a discussion of whether we apply the parking beyond the areas that have been described here, because I view that as a significant policy change that should be noticed and made more public before we'd ever discuss something like that. So I'm not open to a discussion of what's in the map or not in the map, because I view that as well beyond that. That should be something that's noticed and talked about in the community, not something that's just talked about here. That I'd be interested in your opinion on that. So I'm comfortable. Staff's talking to MTC, they're talking to the people, let them do their jobs. I trust staff to do their jobs correctly. So I'm comfortable with that and would not be comfortable introducing a new policy outside beyond that. I think I've covered everything other people have mentioned.
Did you want our attorney to answer?
Yeah.
I think the public comment acknowledged that there wouldn't be any required change in the ordinance language itself, and it was really a comment about the application and what due diligence staff does in communicating with other agencies, and so that is not necessarily within the purview of the EPC. The EPC is reviewing the ordinance and providing a recommendation on the proposed language.
Because I thought I heard a request for a policy decision. Did I misunderstand? Yeah. Okay, sorry. All right. Okay.
Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have kind of like a laundry list of very quick question, or not quick question, comments here, but let me start. I think what Commissioner Cranston said about sort of that distinction between what's policy and what's cleanup here, I think that's a really good point. And just for me, I'm a big believer, like I love when we do omnibus measures. I love code hygiene, that's awesome. And I hope we do more of these. I actually think this is a very good exercise. When we do the exercise, I think we should be scrupulously careful that we keep, as best we can, sort of policy decisions out of it, because that we should, as it was said, we should just agendize those, have a full-out conversation about things that are, to any degree, significantly discretionary. If it's just making sure that we're square with state statute, fine by me. So philosophically, I just wanted to put that out there, that I think omnibus exercises like this should just keep a lot of the discretionary stuff out of it. Having said that, I'm broadly okay with what's in here. I'm not sure how we're doing scorekeeping for the different issues that were brought up and how we're going to vote for them, but I can throw a few out if that's good for you, Madam Chair.
Please state your opinion on them.
I will state my opinion. Let's see, what do I got here? I remain ever so mildly worried about Micos in multifamily dwellings, because you clearly stayed in better apartments than I did, because, man, I had some loud ones. I just want to make sure that because I don't really know how, if the county said, yeah, you can do this, I don't know how that interacts with whatever agreements people have with their landlords and how long their lease runs and whether those terms, how they grandfather. I just don't really know how that works. So I just hope that there is consideration given as this is being fleshed out, that we're thinking about, that we're not just thinking about like an R1 scenario, but we're really thinking about people that are living densely packed so that, all their kids can sleep and all their kids don't smell smoke, through a wall or whatever that is. So that's me worried about that. On multiple permits, my perspective is, I actually think it's fine to have multiple permits. We've heard from the community, there's multiple folks out in the community that think that has value. And as long as the city doesn't feel like that's gumming up the work, slowing things down, as long as the city feels like the cost of the permits is, matches the work that you have to put into them, the confusion issue wouldn't be enough for me to say, yeah, let's just go to single permits. I think multiple permits are fine, as long as it's not gumming up the works. And perhaps we all could do a better job of maybe explaining to the public like why you're seeing multiple permits here. But I'm fine with there being multiple permits. I think Commissioner Clark's idea about roofs, I'm totally good with that. And there was another one that I think I was totally good with. Internal balconies, I could live with internal balconies. I am mindful, by the way, that if the council has previously said they don't want balconies, then I'm always going to defer to that. But if for any reason that's an open question, I could live with an internal facing balcony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Haymeyer.
Great. I know we're getting late into the evening, so I'll be quick. Online permitting is coming to Mountain View, and I'm very excited about this, as I'm sure staff is. But I think that that's really a great opportunity if there are multiple applications that could be clearly communicated. And so if someone wants to pay multiple permit fees and file multiple applications, as long as we can denote this is their preferred choice, that would be my recommendation that the Planning Commission moves forward, is that we're going to have a tool that makes this more transparent and visible to the public. So if we can use that to eliminate that confusion, we should. Open internal facing balconies. Support what Commissioner Clark said about screening. I understand the conversation about the maps. I will just say, like, El Camino Real and the 52222 route seems to be a spine of transit parallel to Caltrain, and so I hope that when that comes back, we can see what the strong defense is of using that criteria. I'm fine with interior facing balconies. I'm less certain on the height limits. Like, I think we're assuming that this is a deep rectangular lot, and I can imagine that there are scenarios where you'd have a 2-story ADU that might not, where increasing that height limit might have implications that I'm not fully aware of. So that one I'd be deferential to the rest of the group. And I think that's it. Multiple applications, flexibility on the screening, ADUs. Is there anything else you're looking for, Chair Yun?
There was ADU heights, roof decks. You already discussed AB 2097. Mikos? I guess you were not really proposing anything. That's part of the state. You were just wanting staff to consider multifamily issues, given that it's to the property line. What you're saying? Okay. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Madam Chair, thank you. And just to chime in here, based on, since I started the conversation, and I didn't have a chance to chime in on Chris's proposal for the internal structure, I'm in favor of that as well, so, for the record.
The internal ADU balcony?
Yes. No. The structure.
Roofing?
Yes.
Roof screening?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, that's it. I'll chime in here. Just a couple of quick clarification questions. Currently for the roof screening, projects can screen right up against the utility itself. So if they are in the center, the screen can go all the way up to cover it. So they have the ability to go ahead and screen maximally.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. On that note, I think you already have actually the majority there to incorporate flexibility for the roof screening. But I'll just go ahead and add my little 2 cents in there and say, okay. I believe we have the majority for the internal ADU balcony to make a recommendation to look into that for council. For myself, I agree with Commissioner Cranston on the rest of the ADU policy, that we leave it as you have written it. As far as the cap on permit applications, you're at, we have 3 people. I am with Commissioner Clark. I am sort of either or. I can see scenarios where it would complicate things. I can see scenarios where it might make it better and more efficient. So I'm a little torn there. If you're saying that we don't really get those, it's mainly for the larger cities. And we are revising the zoning ordinance at this point constantly in steps as things come. I'm okay to leave it as you've written, and when the next wave, we can revisit if things change and we find that there is a need and that applications are coming in. And that is it for me. I think we have consensus on the ADU balcony internal. I'll just review this. Consensus on the roof screening. And please tell me if I'm wrong. Those are where we have consensus. Is anyone else keeping track? Yes, please.
I thought there was,
Someone who's-
in general, consensus around removing the one application provision.
Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3. One, Commissioner Clark and I were like, but then I leaned to a no, and, oh, you know what it is? Commissioner Nunez, you had said that you were open to it if we used findings. Would you like to alter where you stand?
Yeah, that it was proposition for consideration to kind of maintain a presumption of accepting applications even if more than one is being submitted for the property, while also giving staff the ability to reject a duplicate application, some wildly kind of like gaming the system application that maybe they do encounter and would kind of muck things up for them, with some kind of requirement that they provide a just cause or some reason. It's an idea, it's a proposal, and as I mentioned in my comment, otherwise I'd just lean towards no. But to the extent that's something that staff thinks would be a good idea, to the extent that's something that the rest of the commission feels might be a good go-between, it was an idea. And I think Commissioner Haymeyer also had another idea around that I really enjoyed, and then I just blanked out on the application, so I can't recall that. And I just remember thinking that was a great idea. So I don't know if you can recall that. If not, then that's the idea I had.
Okay. At this point, we have 3 that are for, and you were putting out a substitute. And I think Commissioner Gutierrez had originally put out the motion. So
Right, to just not have it. I thought I had heard 4, but maybe Sandy can chime in.
please, yeah.
Madam
Did you
Chair,
count?
might you want to just take a straw poll right now?
Oh, we could do that, absolutely. For just flat out saying, release the cap. Remove the cap.
And I think
Can you go ahead and raise
just to
your
respond
hand?
to Commissioner Nunez, I think because there's going to be online permitting available on some, I don't know, you would know better than me when the timeline is, but that would be a greater transparency tool for a developer to indicate this is my preferred application.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and go with the original first and take a straw poll to see how many are in favor of just removing the cap as is. 1, 2. Okay. Then we have a majority. All right. Okay.
So just to clarify, Madam Chair, that would be to allow for multiple
Yes.
applications.
Are there any other of these that I may have missed?
None that you missed, but a few that I just wanted to clarify what we're. So one is, so on the equipment screening, my goal wasn't to just totally derail what you proposed. I think it was to, the default can be, screen it up to the height, and Chair, you rightly pointed out, if you want to do that around the equipment, I think my experience has been the screens are at the perimeter of the building, and then there's no screens internally. So I think the default should be the height, but I just want people to have the ability to come up with something more creative if it works, as opposed to just saying thou shalt screen it up to the height no matter what, just because that might create some unintended consequences. Is that okay? I don't want to complicate your life any more than it already
Yeah, no, I
is.
appreciate it. I think what you're focusing on is maybe the placement of the screen relative to the building face is maybe one way I might try to describe it. But so yeah, we can definitely look at how we can maybe consider some objective standard, because that's the key for us would be it needs to be objective. But yeah.
Through an exceptions process or something. But That's really what I was getting at.
We can look into that.
Okay. And then I just have one other thing that I was slightly confused about. So you referenced the 18-foot height limit in state law, but there's another place where it's 16. And so if it's just 18, if it's 18 across the board, then I have no interest in messing with that number and making it higher or lower. But if we're doing this step thing where it's like 16 is okay, but 18 is also okay, but only because of the transit thing. I guess what I'm getting at is, are we trying to adopt rules that follow state law, but like at the bare minimum that they allow us to do? Or is it more like, if 18 is allowed, then is it 18 across the board? Because I keep hearing 18, but I haven't heard 16, so.
Yeah, so it's completely what the state law says, and it's not 18 feet across the board. That's if it's within a half mile of a major transit stop or located on a multi-story, multi-family site. So there are certain circumstances where it would be limited to 16 feet.
Okay. So not to rehash the thing, but I'll just say my piece and we can let it go. My concern about 16 instead of 18 is if you've got 8-foot ceilings at 2 stories, is you're basically guaranteeing a flat roof structure, which is really ugly. I've seen concepts where they sort of slant it to make it look less painfully obvious that it's just a big rectangular box. But 18 gives you a little bit more to play with architecturally, and I think actually aesthetically moves the needle. But if we don't want to rehash that, we don't need to. I worry about the 16-foot instead of just going with what the state is on the 18. Otherwise, I think I agree. I think, Chair, you summarized everything pretty well.
Okay, does anyone else have any additional comments? Yes. Commissioner Haymeyer.
This came in one of the public comments, and I didn't hear it again tonight, but I wanted to see if there was interest in the commission in talking about AB 2097 and the hotel parking mandate, understanding that the proposal from staff is to align with state law, but if we would want to remove that mandate for hotels. I haven't heard any support for it tonight, so I understand if that's a bridge too far without further discussion, but I wanted to throw it out there.
Okay, well, we could take a straw poll. We're going to do a straw poll.
Oh, I thought we just did.
Go ahead. Raise your hands if there is any interest in removing the hotel parking. We have 3. Okay.
And did you vote?
Yes, I did. Yes, thank you. So that did not move forward. Okay, if that summarizes everything, no. Oh, there's a list growing. Commissioner Nunez?
I'm happy to rehash the ADUs. I'm also, I guess, like, just to clarify, were you thinking it might be wise to just say 18 across the board? Is that where you were getting at?
I just think the 16 versus 18 is very confusing, and if 18 is, I would just have it 18 across the board.
I'm fully
That's just
on
me.
board with that.
Do we have any other takers in straw poll form here?
Could you just be a little bit clearer when we're doing the straw polls? So right now we are taking one on the 18-foot.
Yes, whether
Okay.
or not to go ahead and go 18 foot across the board versus the 16 and 18 if you're within the transit. Okay, we have a majority. Any rehashing of additional ones? Okay, I think we're good there then. So at this point, would you like me to summarize staff overall, or do you have that?
So I have a total of 4 that we have consensus on. Flexibility on the roof screen, as was discussed. Looking into allowing internal facing ADU balconies. remove the limit of one planning application and increase the ADU height to 18 feet unilaterally.
Yes, that's what I have. Thank you. So at this point, do we make a motion with these changes? Does it have to be read in
Yes.
total with the changes?
Yes.
Who gets to do that? Who wants to do that? Okay. Commissioner Cranston is teed up.
Okay. So, I'm assuming what's on the first page of this is the same as what's on the slides, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm going to make a motion that the Environmental Planning Commission recommended City Council, number one, to find proposed amendments to Chapter 36 of the Mountain View City Code be exempt under California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to CEQA guidelines, section 15061, subsections B1 through B3, as amendment to align with state legislation, implement adopted housing element programs, relate to ministerial activities otherwise categorically exempt under CEQA guidelines, and otherwise covered by common sense exemptions, that the amendments will not result in a significant effect to the environment. Number two, adopt an ordinance of the City Council, the City of Mountain View, amending Chapter 36 zoning of the City Code to align with the recently enacted state law and to implement the 2023 to 2031 housing element programs, including updates to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, the land use table, and development standards in residential, commercial, industrial zones related to low barrier navigation centers, child daycare, employee housing, and other residential uses, and parking requirements and provisions for micro-enterprise home kitchen operation, hydrogen fuel stations, to modify provisions related to entitlement applications, development review, hearing, and extension process to clarify or streamline existing procedures and practices, to incorporate permit provisions for moving, building, and making minor modifications, clarifications, and technical corrections as the exhibit to the staff report, and then amended for staff to modify the section on roof screening to increase flexibility on placement while still ultimately keeping screening of the roof utilities, to change the ADU height across the board to 18 feet, for staff to include a provision to permit interior facing balconies, and to remove the amendment that would have restricted applications to one per property. Did I get that right?
Yes, excellent.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Clark. Or Gutierrez, sorry, I saw your mouth move.
I was just going to ask if we can, in the transmittal, if we can just, I think staff will do this anyway, but on the ADU balcony, just make it clear that it's the detached, because you've already covered the attached, so it's the detached one that's inward facing, and then on the 18 feet ADU height, it's less about like wanting to give people maximum development potential and more like architectural flexibility, so that we're not just dealing with a whole bunch of rectangular boxes. But if others are okay with that, I just wanted to, as long as the council gets some summary of of our thinking around that.
Everyone is okay with those? Yes. Okay.
Sorry, what's the difference between architectural versus
Well, it does give you the additional development capacity, but I think in more cases than not, because you're not just stacking 8 feet on top of 8 feet, you're going to get something a little bit, there's going to be more diversity of things, I think.
Okay. We're good. That ends the EPC deliberation and voting. We had a second. We have to vote. Sorry. Let's take the vote. It's just taking a moment. I think they're working on it. Motion is carried unanimously. That's the end of agenda item 6.1. We will now move to agenda 7.1, proposed Environmental Planning Commission meeting dates for 2024. We'll first have a staff presentation from Diana Pancioli, Principal Planner. Then move to EPC questions, public comments. Go ahead, Diana, thank you.
Thank you. There is no staff presentation. I think there's just one, sorry about that. There's just one memo which shows the proposed dates for 2024 for the EPC operations next year. Yes.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Commissioner Cranston, you're next.
Have we canceled meetings? I noticed we canceled the meeting the week of the planning commissioners. I don't remember us canceling that meeting that week before. Is that?
Yeah, I think in the draft calendar that was attached, it does consider the planning commissioners training week where we don't schedule any EPC meetings. That has been the practice for a few years.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yes, I wanted to thank the team for working together and to come in a consensus and building something new for the betterment of the city. I think we're gelling together more and more as we go through this process. But I also have a question in terms of the schedule, since we will be having a new committee member in terms of what we had last year with a presentation for the processes involved for being part of the team. I know we waited till the last meeting last year to do our meeting on the processes and procedures of being part of the committee, the present committee. Are we going to have something similar to that as well, or would we refer Mr. Donahue to the meeting that we had before so he could have frame of reference of what we spoke about in terms of how we do things at the committee level?
So, thank you for the question. We will be having a meeting with our new commissioners for onboarding, and we'll be providing him some resources on that. At this point of time, we have not scheduled a similar meeting that you were referencing to for the new member.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Haymeyer.
I just wanted to clarify the last meeting dates for this calendar year, if we can. So I have 3 more meetings, the November 15th, and then 2 in December. Is that right? The 6th and the 20th? Is that still accurate?
So you're asking about this year's?
2023. Yep.
Can I answer it as part of agenda item number 8?
She's coming to it. Yeah.
Neglected that we were in the 2024 commission. Sorry.
Are there any other questions or comments on this item? No. I was just going to bring one thing up really quickly. I just had noticed. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I have a comment first on the meeting schedule. And it was just that I had noticed that June 19th, the Wednesday is Juneteenth, which is a new federal holiday, and thought given that it is a federal holiday, that if there's some flexibility, we should move that date off since we're planning ahead. There's nothing scheduled necessarily that I know of. Can we maybe look at potentially moving that one?
Sure. So that date has been added to the calendar at this time because it is not a holiday as per the city calendar. But if the commission would like to, vote on removing that date, we can cross it out at this point of time. And when we will be in June, we will consider again if there is an item which needs to come to EPC, we will schedule a special meeting at that point of time.
A week later would be the 26th. We could just say right now we'll
to change the date. You mean?
Change it to the 26th, and then if we don't need it, we don't need it.
We can do that.
I personally would rather have it on the calendar and blocked,
So
that I don't have to then move something else. So I'll propose that we move the 19th of June to the 26th of June.
Does everyone want to check their calendars and vote on that? Or can I take a straw poll to see how many people are in favor? Okay. So there's a motion to move June 19th.
So I move that we adopt the proposed calendar with the change with one only change being from June 19th to June 26th. All other dates proposed by staff are accepted as is.
Do we have a second? We have a second, Commissioner Haymeyer. And now let's vote. The motion carries unanimously. We will now move on to agenda item 8. Commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the commission at this time, I believe. Diana, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just had one quick update. Our next EPC meeting for November 15th has been canceled. And at this point of time, our next regular meeting will be on December 6th. And I think that's all that we have on the calendar.
One more meeting.
No meeting on the 20th.
December 6th is the remaining
excited.
meeting for the EPC for this calendar year.
That's correct.
Thank you for that. Okay, any others from the commission? Any updates, comments? None? All right, if that's the case, then we will adjourn the meeting at 9:45. Thank you.